Welcome, everyone. Good afternoon. It's my pleasure to get to welcome you to the second program in our 5th annual Art of the Possible series. My name is Rebecca Ivanoff, and I serve as Assistant Dean for Career Planning and Professional Development at the University of Oregon School of Law. As many of you know, the Art of the Possible is a collaboration between our law school, University of Oregon, the University of Oregon Women's Law Forum, and the United States District Court for the District of Oregon, and specifically with the Honorable Ann Aiken. This program was conceived as a way to introduce law students to the professional possibilities that are open to them with a JD degree. We sought to encourage students to think expansively about their career options and to consider how they can influence the practice in new and innovative ways. Our earlier program in the fall had the theme of Yes, You Can, with CAN focused on designing your future using creativity, authenticity, and nimbleness. Today's program continues to explore themes around innovation and specifically the innovative ways in which professionals are influencing the criminal justice system. We are so thrilled to have this exciting group of speakers with us today who will share more about their professional journeys, their work, and the innovative ideas and practices that will influence criminal justice reform as we move forward in the context of our present time. Before we move into the formal program today, I want to cover a few housekeeping matters. Most folks at this point in time are familiar with Zoom and the functionality of Zoom, but I want to cover a few details about how our program will work today. First, I want to share with everyone that we are recording today's program and it will be made available to participants who are not able to attend live. So our primary audience today is students. We have both law students and admitted law students, as well as undergraduate students. But we've also expanded this invitation to include members of our community who have an interest in this topic, as well as lawyers who are interested in learning more. So many of you know how Zoom works. I'll tell you that we are going to have an interactive experience today in which you'll be able to ask questions. You can pop those in the chat. Those will come directly to me, and I'll go ahead and monitor those so I can offer those to our panelists at the appropriate time. Finally, I want to welcome everyone from the different parts of our community who have joined us, specifically for our attorneys in attendance today who might be seeking CLE credit. I wanted you all to know that we will make application to the Oregon State Bar for credit for today's program. And any of you who signed up using your Oregon State Bar ID number, you can plan on having us share that with the bar, and your dashboard should be updated within about a month. If you signed up without your Oregon State Bar number, you can always just submit your request for credit to the bar directly. And without further ado, it is my great pleasure to get to introduce all of you to the Honorable Ann Aiken. I have to say it has been such an incredible pleasure to get to work with Judge Aiken on this program for the last 5 years. And I'm excited to get to tell you all a little bit more about her history today. Judge Aiken is a double duck and a long-standing supporter of the University of Oregon School of Law and our students. Judge Aiken was confirmed as a United States District Court judge for the District of Oregon on February 5th, 1998, and served as Chief Judge of the District of Oregon from 2009 to 2016. In her work on the bench, Judge Aiken has presided over numerous complex civil and criminal trials, including cases involving Oregon's Vote by Mail Act, the USA Patriot Act, water rights, environmental and natural resources, intellectual property, and employment discrimination. She also has far-reaching experience as a settlement judge and a long-standing commitment to alternative dispute resolution. Prior to her federal appointment, Judge Aiken was a practitioner and served as a state, district, and circuit court judge for 10 years in Lane County. Judge Aiken is also committed to reentry programs that facilitate criminal offender reentry into the community, and she supervises the District of Oregon reentry court programs in both Eugene and Medford. Judge Aiken has been working in the intersection of technology and social science to better address the supervision needs of high-risk offenders returning from incarceration. She is a frequent speaker and program organizer at events focused on law and technology. Judge Aiken has received numerous awards for her longstanding commitment to public service and the legal community. She was honored by Portland State University's Center for Women's Leadership with the 2015 Law Advocacy and Policy Award. She was a 2015 Fast Case 50 winner, which honored people who have charted a new course for the delivery of legal services. She was awarded the 2005 Oregon Women Lawyers Justice Betty Roberts Award in recognition of an individual who's made an outstanding contribution to promoting women in the legal profession and in the community. And she also received the Wallace P. Jr. Judicial Excellence Award in December of 2009, presented by the Oregon State Bar, among others. She is deeply committed to mentorship and has mentored and sponsored countless students over the years in her role as a leader with the bench and bar. She's a strong advocate of the three-legged stool model, prioritizing work, community, and family. As a second-generation Oregonian, Judge Aiken, along with her late husband, James R. Klonowski, who worked as a political science professor at University of Oregon for over 40 years, raised 5 sons, and she is the proud grandmother of 5 grandchildren. Please join me in welcoming Judge Aiken.
Are you sure that wasn't like an obituary? It's like she sounds really old. I'm grateful to be here. And I went skiing last weekend for my birthday. So I feel robust and I feel as young as all of you watching you today. And I'm so excited for your opportunity to hear this amazing panel. And I got to take 2 seconds to say I've had the privilege to have met each one of these individuals in their capacity as a positive disruptor of the current system and leaders to make a difference in getting better outcomes with better use of resources and humanity towards the individuals that we're required to serve, and at the same time to protect the community in very sophisticated and yet simple ways so that there isn't re-victimization when people come out of prison. So you are going to hear from 4 spectacular people today. And in my journey on the bench, it's been my privilege to meet them in various segments of trying to look at how we can do better work. But my true calling at this point is in this program is to introduce you to really a person who I consider to be my comrade in arms. And that is Mark Sherman. I met Mark Sherman, I was thinking about it, probably 2005-ish, when he called and asked me to participate in putting a program together for all the U.S. District Court judges across the country on reentry. And from that moment on, I felt like I have found a person who understood systems change, what's possible, evidence-based practices, the intersection between neuroscience and the law, neuroscience and change, the way in which we work with the social sciences, and how to motivate people to participate and work with us to overcome the hurdles that we all see when we read pre-sentence reports. Mark is skilled. He's been an educator his entire career, and his bio that you have is just the tip of the iceberg. But I had the privilege of participating in the class he's taught for 20 years at American University, and as an undergraduate course, which is incredibly sophisticated and was a delight for Robbie Reeves, my law clerk, and I to participate in and just explain a small part of sentencing. So Mark is really going to lead this discussion. He is the educator and the program director for almost all the high-end programs for probation, pretrial, but most importantly on the criminal justice programs for the judges. So I have, it's a gift to have him give us his time today. And I have to just touch on Janice Hebert. It was a joy and a gift when she came to Oregon as the civil chief. I can't say enough nice things about her ability to do the work she's done for Oregon, but more importantly, her longstanding criminal justice reform work across the country with Vanita Gupta, who you all should know her name now by heart. And then I want to call on one of my heroes, and I met now DA Mike Schmidt when he was a staffer and with the Oregon Criminal Justice Commission, and then the director, and his commitment to better work and looking at the intersection, as I talked about, Mark, is extraordinary. And he had the courage, and I admire him endlessly, to put it to practice by running as the DA, and now is the DA of Multnomah County. a true partner for all of us who care about this work. And then finally, I have to say, Cait Clarke, and I'm saying this because if y'all have to speak up, these are people who, for their lives, mentor people. They're raising up the next generation of legal leaders. They have contacts all over the country. Not all of you are from Oregon. They can help you in lots of different ways. So why don't you speak up? Cait Clarke and I met when she first took over as chief of the Defender Services for the Administrative Office of the Court, which is the big name for the person who oversees all the criminal defense contracts and programs for the United States Federal District Courts and courts across this country. She has an unbelievable story, and we won't get time for it today, but look her up. And I hope to have her back in a different context down the road. She's been out to Oregon several times and is really a friend to all of us out in Oregon. So with that, I'm turning it over to my compatriot in all the work that we've done with the federal court, and someone who I admire endlessly because he has such intellectual curiosity for this work that it keeps me hopping. So Mark Sherman, it's all yours.
Thank you so much, Judge Aiken. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you may be across the country. I assume most are in Oregon. I am here in the belly of the beast, Washington, D.C., and it's still a beast, always will be, always has been, but it's a really interesting beast. And we can talk more about that, certainly. And I'm just very, very honored to be asked to do this. So thank you so much, Judge Aiken. A great colleague, and we've just had together over the past, now I think 12, 13 years, working together on various things, mostly concerning the issues concerning re-entering citizens. So people coming home from prison, and most do come back to the community from prison, and how the courts, in our case, the federal courts, can be more innovative and supportive in working with people coming back to the community from prison. So you all, as students, and even if you're practitioners, are just so lucky to have her in your community. Somebody who really knows how to think outside the box, which is really what this discussion needs to be about, sort of the art of the possible. What is possible? Those of you who are law students, and I know we have a mixed audience, but mostly law students, some who are about to become law students. If you've already been admitted, congratulations. I was thinking before we came on how lucky you are to have this opportunity to talk about these kinds of things at this point, whether you are just going to be starting law school in the fall, or whether you're a 3L and you're in the second semester and you're looking toward graduation. It doesn't matter. It's just it's a perfect time to be talking about this. And this is not something that I had when I was in law school back in the last century. We did have a career office, and it was helpful within sort of the four corners, so to speak, of what lawyers do. But we had nothing like this in person. Certainly didn't have it via Zoom. So you all are very fortunate to be able to have an opportunity to think about these kinds of things, have folks like my colleagues and Judge Aiken to talk to and ask questions. And I do want to really reiterate Judge Aiken's point about asking questions. Please participate. We will have about a half hour to take your questions, or we're very interested in your reactions to all of this, and want to be able to engage in some kind of a dialogue with you. It's always awkward when we're doing this at a distance, but if you could just sort of send those questions to Dean Ivanoff, and when we get to the question and answer session in the last half hour, we really are looking forward to that part of it. So we are talking about the art of the possible. We are talking about criminal justice reform and sort of what to expect in 2021. But the spin here is also on innovation, right? And this is a really interesting time, to put it lightly, in our country. And certainly, even before the events of January 6th, was a very interesting time in criminal law and criminal justice and the criminal legal system. And my colleagues on the panel are really doing some exciting work. So I want to sort of move things forward. And really the first question for the panel is, how did you get to where you are? We thought when we were talking yesterday, preparing for this, the panelists and myself, what is it that we would have liked to hear if we were in your shoes? And like, how did you get to where you are? So I want to turn to the hometown favorite, the district attorney, Mike Schmidt. Mike, if you wouldn't mind just sort of telling us sort of how you got, what was your career path and how did you get to where you are?
Yeah, thanks, Mark. And thanks, Judge Aiken, for reaching out. It's an honor to be here with these great leaders and facilitate and make more connections, because that's what this is about. So Mark, yeah, I was thinking about that as you were giving the introduction and who we're talking to and looking at, some people who may be in undergrad, some people who are 1Ls. And I remember where I was or what I was thinking when I was in their chair. And that was, boy, environmental law sounds really interesting. I should go be an environmental lawyer. And I think I should go to Oregon. And I applied to Lewis and Clark to go be an environmental law student. So that's what I was thinking when I was in their chair and pre-contemplative of law school. And then even through my first year. And it just goes to show you that there are possibilities and you just don't know. And that's one of the great things about the law, right? Is that you go in there and you start to actually learn. And I had this idea that, I'd go to law school, be an environmental lawyer, and that would be me hiking and biking and kayaking and suing polluters. And that was going to be what I did. Well, it turned out not to, that wasn't the path that I thought that was possible. But what I did find out when I got into law school is that there's a huge world of things that you can do. And I had the opportunity to be an intern at the district attorney's office in Multnomah County. And so that was my first real experience. I had never thought about criminal law or being a participant. I had thought about it in other contexts. Before law school, I was a teacher in New Orleans. I taught high school students in public schools in New Orleans. And I saw how the criminal justice system impacted their lives. And I saw things that, bothered me about that and things that I thought could be done better. But I never thought that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go get into that. But then I got into law school and I went to a career fair and I talked to people at tables and lo and behold, I actually ended up applying to be an intern at both the public defender's office and the prosecutor's office. Because I was like, I don't really have a bent, philosophical bent. I'm interested in criminal law, and it seems like I could help people either way. The public defenders, they passed on me, so the DAs picked me up. So I guess I don't know. I don't know what to think about that. But so that's how I got my first chance, and I interned in the Multnomah DA as a CLS between my second and third years for the summer full time, and then stayed on during my third year of law school in a more part-time role and prosecuted misdemeanors and did civil commitments and really got my first taste. And I knew after that that's what I wanted to do after law school as well. And so I went on and became a deputy DA, and I did that for 5-6 years in the Multnomah District Attorney's office. And I got that experience, and I loved the work and I loved the job. But I also, going back to my time as a high school teacher and some of the things that interested me about reform and how can I go in and be a change agent. And, after being in the DA's office for 5-6 years, I realized that I wasn't changing anything. I had learned it and I loved the work, but I wasn't having the impact I wanted. And so I got out and my career path kind of circuitously, again, when I left, I definitely didn't think, 6 years from now, I'll be the DA of this office. That was also not in my thought process. But I went and worked for the legislature. I was counsel to the House and Senate Judiciary Committees, which introduced me to a whole wide world of people working in this area, working on reform, working on policy. And then from there, little known state agency, the Criminal Justice Commission, a powerhouse in this state for criminal justice research, for transparency and data and best practices and grant funding, and was really fortunate to have the opportunity to start there as a staffer and then be promoted by the governor to be the executive director. And just an incredible opportunity where I was exposed to so many things around the country. I got to go to Norway and tour their prisons and see that we can do this differently. We can do this better. And Judge Aiken referenced humanity. That's their approach, is a humanity-centered approach, and they get better results than we do. So I was really like, my eyes were open to a lot of things, and the possibilities were really broadened. And so when I saw the opportunity to say, you know what, if this is what I believe, and I think that we can do things better, I think we can use data, I think we can be more transparent, we can get better outcomes, we can treat people with humanity and dignity and accomplish better public safety, I knew that I had to step up and run to be the district attorney in Multnomah County. And I got a little bit of a head start on the job even before I anticipated, and started August 1st when the then district attorney retired early. So I've been at it for over 6 months now.
Thank you so much, Mike. So just to summarize for the audience, you heard law, policy, research, management, international or transnational work, all within only, sure, Mike's been at it for a while, but, just over a very few years. So I think this is what we're talking about by sort of approaching the work of a lawyer or somebody with a law degree in a very sort of open-minded way, and not uncommon for an individual to enter law school thinking they're going to be doing a certain type of work, environmental law in my case, and then coming out doing something really radically different, sort of at this point in his career. So thank you so much, Mike. I want to turn to Janice Hebert, another local favorite, who's currently in Yosemite National Park. And Janice, maybe same question. What was your career path, and how did you get to where you are?
Okay, so I started out as a state court law clerk in the judicial district in Louisiana, right out of law school. And I met some of the judges on the bench there. One was nominated for a federal judgeship, and he took me up to federal court with him. So, and I was his lead law clerk. So I did the whole range of what you do in state court, which is civil and criminal, wide ranging of community property and divorce and small criminal actions, and then death penalty cases and all of that in state court. And then I went up to federal court for a couple of years, and is a limited jurisdiction there. So the subject matter was reduced to some more complicated and expensive issues and federal crimes. And from there, I went to the U.S. Attorney's Office, but not where, when you hear U.S. Attorney's Office, you think criminal prosecutors, federal criminal prosecutors. My practice was in the civil realm. And what that means in a U.S. Attorney's Office is that any federal agency within a district of that U.S. Attorney's Office, when they get sued, they're looking for a litigator, they're looking for a lawyer to represent their interests in federal court. And that's what I did. So wide range of personal injury tort cases, like an FBI agent rear-ending somebody on the highway, that's going to be a tort case involving that particular agency. Postal service running off the road, those kinds of things. It was the widest range of subject matter I could ever have contemplated. We did regulatory work for agencies whose regulatory scheme came under litigation scrutiny. And then, it's very determined by what is in the district where you work. And in my district in Louisiana, we had a lot of federal prisons. We had a large immigration detention center. We had a camp, a medium security facility, which was, housing 1,200 people. And then we got a maximum security, well, high security, not maximum, but high security prison. So the whole range of prison conditions came up. Oregon only has one prison at Sheridan. So that practice was limited once I got to Oregon. And then I found this little niche that I really kind of cracked open for myself, took an opportunity within the practice in the U.S. Attorney's Office to do, it's a little known subject matter in the civil division of civil rights enforcement actions. So there's no criminal penalties associated with those actions, but we would do remedial work. So I did, in Louisiana, I did school desegregation work, a lot of it. We did some public accommodations work, which is, folks not allowing certain groups of people into their facilities for services. We did that, we did fair housing. And I really found something that I loved and that I felt very satisfied doing. And so most of the time, the Civil Rights Division out of the Department of Justice in Washington does that practice, but often they're looking for help. And if the local U.S. attorney will allow his employees in the Civil Division to pitch in or to be the face of that litigation, which I can tell you in Louisiana, to have a local Cajun saying, this is how you shouldn't be doing this. You can do it this way. Here's another way. That was so much more palatable to a lot of the people that we had in litigation than having somebody from Washington come in and say, I'm from the government and I'm here to help. That never really kind of was effective. But having a local person made it very effective and made it seem more palatable, was the way I'd have to say it. And then when I got to Oregon, the practice changed. I had the same job, different district, which meant different kinds of work. A lot of environmental defense in Oregon, a lot less corrections work. We had a very large district attorney's office there. Veterans Affairs Hospital. So we ended up doing some medical malpractice, all of that. Very wide range of subject matter within the Department of Justice.
So one of the takeaways here, Janice, is, and audience, is, whenever we think about the United States Attorney's Office, as Janice said, we tend to think about, federal prosecutors, and that's certainly accurate. But there's also this civil side, which is very important to talk about. And the practice is so varied. The practice that Janice just described is so varied. Everything from tort litigation through civil rights enforcement, working with the Civil Rights Division at the Justice Department. So really a very broad range of civil types of casework, but also I think it's very helpful to note sort of the regional aspects of the work, right? As you're thinking about where you may want to set up shop somewhere down the road. I'll talk a little bit about myself later, but just by way of example, I ended up I went to law school in Southern Florida at the University of Miami. I grew up in Florida. So I was thinking, I'll move back home. I had gone to undergraduate school in DC, moved back home to Florida, figured I'd be living in Florida after law school, went to law school in Miami. Long story short, 5 days after I graduated from law school, I was back in DC. So, you really sort of, to the degree, you can plan, I wouldn't say plan, but I would say think about sort of these regional differences. And as you move along in your schooling and in the early part of your career, sort of where does it make the most sense for you to be physically to do the kind of work that you want to do? Some of the work is, it doesn't matter where you are, criminal cases are criminal cases. But for example, with environmental work, it might matter where you are physically in terms of the opportunities for practice in that area. So thank you so much, Janice. It's wonderful to hear that story. Turning now to my colleague here in the belly of the beast, Cait Clarke. Cait, take it away. Where, how did you get to where you are now?
Great. So thank you all very much for having me. And I would ask that you remember 2 words and I didn't create the 2 words after this panel, but Marie Kondo did. Anybody had read The Art of Tidying Up during COVID? Okay, so spark joy. I would ask that you apply that to your career search. Whatever sparks joy. Don't forget that you have to be mission driven and you have to be passionate about what you do, because don't forget, at the end of the day, it's still a job and you still have to answer those hundreds of emails or get on late at night or do what you got to do. But if you feel it is rewarding in some way, and I'm not saying sparks joy jumping up and down and woo-ha every day, but do you feel like you're contributing in your own personal way? Nobody else's perception. Don't try to build your resume. My route is circuitously creative. Now, let me just say it that way. I want to say what my route was. A real quick story in Louisiana's largest prison farm, and related to the art of the possible. And then just a couple of really quick career search suggestions that I learned way too late in my process. So that's why I thought it might help you all. I started as a law clerk out of law school in the DC Court of Appeals, and I hated some of the cases that were telephone rate cases, but I loved the Public Defender Service briefs, because the Public Defender Service of DC has some of the best, like Supreme Court law clerks, and they would write these amazing issues about what's a usable amount of crack cocaine, and then make these arguments that were so great and creative, and they would help on mental health issues. They were terrific about learning trauma with kids and all the things that happen with living in a housing project, and what your brain does when you eat lead as a baby and how that impacts what your decision making later on. I used to be blown away. I was like, every time I went in to hear their oral argument or read their briefs, I was just blown away by understanding a city that I grew up in, an apartheid black-white city. I grew up in Northwest white DC, and there was this whole other city that I didn't know. So I wanted you to know that after I clerked, I was like, what sparks interest? At least interest, I'm not sure joy. Interest was criminal defense. And so I became a Prettyman Fellow. I really actually had no business getting a Prettyman Fellowship at Georgetown Law Center, except that I think I exuded the passion for the work because of my volunteer work in a soup kitchen every other Friday night. And we'd go out drinking at the old Ebbett Bar and Grill. A bunch of us would volunteer on a Friday night and then go down to the old Ebbett. And it was, as my husband likes to say, I'm an angel, not a saint. And I had a blast because we'd work out in the soup kitchen. And then it ended up that that's what got me the job. It wasn't that I was editor-in-chief of the Law Review. They couldn't give a damn that I was editor-in-chief of the Law Review. Sorry, am I allowed to say those words on this? Remember, we come from the criminal defense world. But I ended up finding out that, like, my gosh, it was my volunteer work in this soup kitchen for women. It was a shelter for women that got me in the door. And then somebody became my advocate in that interview. And there were 4, it was the first year that they only had 5 women that were Prettyman Fellows. So we were, they never have had 5 women since, because we changed the name of the program to the Pretty Women Program, and we ended up really taking a lot of creative advocacy motions, getting people out on really creative things so that they could keep their jobs, keep their children, all of that they call collateral consequences. We never liked that term. We were like, these are direct consequences. People they lose their licenses. They can't drive to work. They can't, maintain their family. So bottom line is I started to get passionate. That's when they sparked the joy. When you would get somebody out or somebody help with their drug addiction or their mental health and get them on some, if they were schizophrenic, and their family would just hug you and say, no one listened. No one listened to our family or my son or daughter. And you were really somebody who wasn't afraid. And frankly, there were times I was afraid. I was going into parts of DC, as I said, that I never went into. And my first client was a heroin addict whose fingers were so blown up and he was shooting up and he wanted to show me under his toes. And I was like, okay, I have to really learn to embrace this world in a way so that I can be a better advocate. And so that took me into another different world. Let me just say the dots. From there, I ended up becoming a law professor because you got your LLM at Georgetown. And then the meat market picked me up, and I had a job in Nebraska and Valparaiso and in Loyola, New Orleans. And I figured I was single, and I'd gotten my old car from MacArthur Boulevard. I drove to New Orleans, and I became a law professor. So who would have known that, right? I ended up teaching, and guess who I got to know? Helen Prejean. And I would take my students to visit the projects because I thought, how can you teach criminal law and criminal procedure to students who've never been in the projects? Meaning I learned that from my life. And then we ended up, I talked to people at Tulane. I said, what do you mean you guys have never been to Angola? It's the largest prison farm in the United States. I mean, it's unbelievable. So I talked to the warden and I said, I want anybody who takes a criminal law and criminal procedure class to go to Angola and spend the day. So we did. Every year I would have buses full of law students, and we would go in to start with the minimum, well, actually the lifers. And this is the art of the possible. And then I'll do my hints. Don't worry, Mark, I have my timer here. I took a group of law students my first year in, and have you heard of the Angolite? You talk about the art of the impossible or almost impossible. It's an award-winning prison magazine with beautiful photography, articles, people writing their life stories. And the Angolite writers were there, and we were sitting outside. It was hot. Remember Louisiana? A bunch of law students. And this one guy said, tell me about you. They were first-year students, most of them, and some second year. And he said, yeah, well, when I was in law school, and then you saw everybody go, what? And he said, yeah, I'm a lifer. I have a life sentence, and I was on the Tulane Law Review. And it silenced those students immediately. They were like, what? And then he describes that he was an accessory in a felony. There was marijuana coming in from South America. He was guarding to make extra money to pay for law school, if you can believe this. So talk about a crazy story. And he ended up getting caught into a very big net, and he went to jail, didn't finish law school. But he always said the art of the impossible or the art of the possible was, I want to be a writer. He basically taught himself a lot of law and became one of the jailhouse lawyers and wrote briefs, helped get some of his friends out. And I say that because if you are sitting in the largest prison farm in Louisiana and you think that you can become a lawyer and help other people and then produce a magazine with your friends and help address the alternative, the criminal, shall I say, the violence within the prison, it happened. And that's a whole nother story. It's a very, very wonderful story about the Angolite and also what's going on in Angola. There's a lot, don't ever take a book by its cover. There's a lot of creative stuff going on in places that you think there are no assets. And then finally, I just want you to know that after that, I sort of went along a way to get my SJD degree, which is your doctorate of juridical science. My SJD was at Harvard, but I really was interested in international work with South Africa. So I ended up getting a scholarship to live in Cape Town, and in post-apartheid era, worked on the right to counsel in a very violent community. And I lived in the townships, and I wrote about plea bargaining that they said didn't exist. But again, don't judge a book by its cover. There was a lot of plea bargaining going on for certain classes and races, but not for the African communities in the townships. I went on to Harvard to run the executive session on public defense. And when I say that was a surprise, it was because I didn't really think there was anything out there in Harvard or at all. And somebody said, I heard that you were doing some work in South Africa and we're trying to run an executive session at the Kennedy School. I talked to him, I put his card in somewhere. And that's a tip. Just collect those cards and never forget that there are circles that will come back later on that you might want to call somebody up and say, hey, I'm looking for an opportunity. Can you give me some advice? People love to be asked for advice, not money. People like to be asked for advice, not to give them a job. Always ask for advice and talk to people for informational interviews. That's what I did. And Harvard's Kennedy School of Government said informational interviews interview, it's kind of a perfect fit. We need somebody to run this, run by the Clinton administration. And then from there on, I went into the nonprofit world. I was a corporate consultant. I taught negotiation training for women and others around the world. I even trained for Halliburton on negotiation skills. But then my heart wasn't joyful in that work. So I had to use what sparks joy, and it brought me back into the National Legal Aid and Defender Association and the Equal Justice Works world, where I ran the fellowships program, started a public defender corps, did all these things that related to public defense, because that's where my heart was. And that's how I ended up where I am in the federal government, running the Federal Defender Program's administrative office. And that's training and other things. But I say that because if you notice, it's so circuitous, but I started to go off track. I was going to be like Mike described, excuse me. Mark, you might have had also different views. I was going to be an international lawyer. I did an internship in a Japanese law firm, and the 6-foot-tall frame that I have, I really stood out in Tokyo riding the subway in the morning. But I ended up doing criminal defense, loving it. And the last tip I'll say is that when you are looking for jobs, don't look for a job, look for your career search, and always think about having several resumes available. I never really thought, I always thought you had one resume. It's not true. Have a resume for this person who you are. I was a social justice criminal defense person, but I could also have a resume that would say, I teach negotiations and leadership skills and consulting. And not that you ignore those other pieces, but some resumes emphasize different things. And I don't know if that is something that everybody in the world knows, but I certainly didn't. I didn't have a lot of different resumes, and I also didn't have a lot of different files with people that do different things. So federal judges who are interested in ADR, Ann Aiken is at the very top of that huge pyramid. And her view is fabulous, by the way, of the three-legged stool: work, community, family, but my three-legged stool is judges, defense lawyers, and prosecutors. And so I'm really happy to be fighting for that third leg of that stool.
Thank you so much, Cait. Going back to the very first thing you said, and then you reminded us toward the end of your remarks, this idea about what sparks joy, the way I frame that, or the way I interpret that, is what gives your life meaning, right? Like what's most important to you as a person, right? And so, and everybody is different. Some people love corporate finance. It gives their life meaning.
Yep.
Then pursue that, right? Some people want to do the civil side stuff, the civil litigation. It's meaningful for them. It's valuable for them. They should do it. So this is an important mantra, I think, for people to live by in any walk of life, but certainly I would say to law students, people who are just starting out, do let that be your guide, and there will be naysayers. There will be people saying to you, you can't do that, or why do you want to do that? Or, you can't make any money doing that. Which is bullshit, because you can make plenty of money, enough money, you can make a decent living doing something that has meaning for you, right? You will figure out a way to make a living doing that thing as a lawyer. Or perhaps not as a lawyer, but somebody with a law degree, and I think this is an important thing to keep in mind, that a law degree is extraordinarily versatile, right? There are many things you can do in addition to the traditional practice of law. And obviously you're hearing some of that from us on the panel. I'll keep my story pretty short, because there are a couple of questions I want to ask the other panelists. So I referred before, I grew up in Florida, went to the University of Miami Law School. 5 days after I graduated from law school, I found myself back in Washington, D.C. I had gone to undergraduate school here and found that I had Potomac fever. So I thought originally I was going to practice law, a traditional area of practice in Palm Beach County, Florida, where I grew up. And here I am in DC, over 30 years later. And one of the things I discovered in law school was that I didn't like law school very much. I did pretty well, but I didn't like it. And one of the reasons I didn't like it was because I thought the teaching methods were awful, right? I had a few good professors, but I thought the Socratic method was used as a blunt instrument by most of my professors. And I was really, really put off by the way law was taught. So one of the things I decided to do while I was in law school, mostly toward the end of my second year and my third year, I decided, I think I want to, I'm interested in the practice of law or being a lawyer, but I'm also interested in teaching the law. And so I was very fortunate. My grades weren't good enough in law school for me to grade onto law review, but I was able to get onto law review through the writing competition, which is how it's usually, I think it's still how that's usually done. I don't really know. And I found that to be a very helpful experience in terms of my career goals. First, I really love to write. So it gave me an opportunity to write and to publish my comment that I was writing. So I was able to do that. And I was able, in the second year of law review, I was able to be on the editorial board. So I was working, my job was the student research and writing editor. So I was able to work with my colleagues, my fellow students on the law review to help them research and write their articles, which has a teaching component to it. I had never really taught before, but that was really interesting to me. And so I started to look for teaching jobs right out of law school, right? And ultimately landed a first year research and writing teaching job at Catholic University here in Washington. And that was my very first job out of law school. So I graduated in May of 1989, and in August of 1989, I was a research and writing teacher at Catholic University Law School teaching first-year students. And as I said, I also wanted to practice law, and the areas of practice I was most interested in were international criminal law and international human rights. And I managed through through a network that I had built while I was in law school to get a couple of consulting positions on international criminal law cases. And I can talk about that later if you have questions about it. And then through a DC bar program for young lawyers, I participated in an international human rights program that sent American lawyers, DC-based lawyers, to El Salvador to work with Salvadoran lawyers on international human rights cases that would be brought before the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights. And so I did that and taught at the same time for the first couple of years out of law school. After that, I went to American University, taught there full-time for 6 years until 1999, from 93 to 99, both at the School of Public Affairs, so undergraduate public law courses, and I was an adjunct at the law school where I taught a course on the international narcotics control policy, and did that until 99. And then in the summer of 1999, I joined my agency, the Federal Judicial Center, which is the research and education agency of the federal courts. Again, because I've been an educator my entire career as a lawyer, but also have practiced and worked in law practice environments in a few very interesting ways. Like Cait, I also sort of laundered my undergraduate law degree through an LLM program at Georgetown, which was across the hall from the Prettyman Fellow program. It was called the Harrison Institute, where we worked on affordable housing cases. So I was an affordable housing lawyer and fellow at Georgetown for a couple of years. So lots of different kinds of practice, very circuitous kind of career path for me, but very meaningful, doing really interesting kinds of work. So I've worked with the lowest income people in Washington, D.C. On their affordable housing legal issues, to working with and providing education for U.S. Court of Appeals judges, district judges, magistrate judges, and working also with, speaking of RBG, working with Justice Ginsburg on a couple of different education programs as well. Several years ago. So really have been able to learn a lot and see a lot and work with a lot of fascinating people all across the spectrum. So that's my story. one of the things we want to talk about before we get to questions is innovation. What's happening now? Criminal justice reform, 2021, here we are. What are we doing that's innovative? And what are some things for you to be thinking about, especially if you're interested in the criminal legal system, criminal justice reform, criminal law, etc. So from my perspective, as Judge Aiken mentioned in the introduction, I work as an educator at the Federal Judicial Center. I manage a team of basically criminal justice educators. Our primary clients are United States probation officers and United States pretrial services officers. I can tell you right now, until I started working, basically, even having done criminal defense work, it wasn't until I started working at the Federal Judicial Center in 1999, basically after 10 years of being a lawyer, that I really had no idea what probation officers or pretrial services officers really did, right? I had some notion of it, but I really didn't know until I got to the FJC. And what I want to tell you is that if you are somebody with a law degree, this is a very interesting career option for you, right? Whether it's probation work or pretrial services work, and often they are combined in the federal system. And you can do this at the federal level, you can do this at the state level, you can do it at the county level, right? So one of the functions of a probation officer is to conduct pre-sentence investigations and write pre-sentence reports. So there's a real influence on the sentencing process. And you're hearing a lot about sentencing reform now when we talk about criminal justice reform. So if you really want to have an influence on sentencing, yes, you could do it as a prosecutor. Yes, you can do that as a defender. And certainly you can do that as a judge, right? But you can also have an immense impact on sentencing as a probation officer who writes pre-sentence reports and does pre-sentence investigations. So that's something to think about. And there are other aspects of probation and pretrial services work that I think you find quite interesting. If you're interested in law and psychology, law and social work, right? Law and neuroscience. So these are some very interesting career paths. And I'm very interested in side doors and back doors for law students, right? This is a competitive legal market, we have what is it? Close to 200 law schools, accredited law schools in the United States. So thousands of people graduating with JDs every year. Where will they go work, right? You have to think creatively and differently about what your career options are, right? So think about what the side doors are. What are the back doors to get what you want and to do work that's meaningful? And working in the federal courts in this way, whether it's working in federal probation or pretrial or working at the clerk of court's office with a JD, can really be a wonderful side door or back door into doing eventually other kinds of legal work, like being a staff attorney for the federal courts, being a career law clerk for federal or state and local courts. So these are some things that I really would urge you to think about, in addition to the suggestions that my colleagues have made in terms of thinking about how to approach your career. I want to go back to Mike Schmidt and Mike. We've heard a lot about progressive prosecutors and the progressive prosecutor movement, which is fascinating and seems to be sort of taking, especially at the state and county level, it's really kind of taking the country by storm. In most regions of the country now, we are seeing the advent of progressive prosecutors, often in the form of district attorneys. So can you talk a little bit about what that means to you and sort of how you're operationalizing that in the work that you're doing?
Yeah, Mark. So, I mean, to kind of answer that question and also weave in your side door, back door, and how you get to these things, when I was in law school and I told my friends, my progressive liberal friends that, hey, I'm going to go be a deputy DA. They were like, what? Why would you go do that? I thought that we shared values. And so maybe it wasn't the most obvious path, as it seems more obvious now with the progressive prosecution movement. But getting in and doing the work, I think, is a great way to be a person that can then have conversations in the policy circles. There's really no, you need to have that experience to be able to really see things. So in terms of the progressive prosecutor movement, and I completely embrace that, I think there's some guiding things that really appealed to me in the way that people are rethinking things. And it's not just prosecution or anything else. I mean, we're having kind of similar conversations. It's can be called defund the police is kind of another way of asking similar questions, which are at the root of, are we doing things that are actually making us safer? And being open to questioning those things. Some of the eye-opening experience that I had, I actually got to go to Angola. I spent the night in Angola for a couple nights as a guest of then Warden Burl Cain. I think
Wow.
He's a little disgraced.
Wow.
He's disgraced at this point, but so I had that experience, and I got to go to Norway. I got to tour their prison system and spend a week or two there with them. And it really opens your eyes to, there are other ways to do these things. And we have colleagues all over the world and even nationally all over the country. I sat on a US Sentencing Commission panel where 20 or so people representing different states analyzed a fact pattern and said, what would the sentence for this fact pattern be in your state? And 20 different people, 20 different states, 20 different answers. And there was a judge at the time, he just kind of leaned back and he said, isn't it fascinating? None of us agree, but we're all right. And it was that moment, like, why are we doing the things that we're doing? And there are reasons locally, and there are news stories, and there are political forces that have built each of us up into different places. But I think the progressive prosecutor movement takes us back to what really works. Let's be focused on public safety. And I think Judge Aiken laid it out right at the beginning. Can we get better results? And can we do that using our resources more wisely? And how do we bring humanity and brain science and research and knowledge into answering those questions? So for me, that's kind of the foundation that we use as a lens to examine everything. In Oregon, in our state, we have some laws that have been on the books for a long time. We have mandatory minimum sentencing that's been on the books with ballot measure 11 for over 2 decades at this point. There's been a lot of research across our country into whether or not that actually makes us safer. We should infuse that in the debate. We know more now than we knew then. The death penalty, cash bail, there are all kinds of issues that I think taking it to this lens of saying, does this actually make us safer? And trusting and looking at the data, looking at the research, and looking at our peers and colleagues. Washington, D.C. Really doesn't rely on cash bail at all. They have a fantastic pretrial system. So could we do that and still maintain public safety? I think the answer is yes. So that's, for me, the progressive prosecution movement is more of a lens to re-examine all the things that we're doing and just openly and honestly talk about, does this make us safer? And the thing that I love about the reform movement is it really cuts across all ideological and political stripes. I talk to conservatives, I talk to progressives, Republican, Democrat, all across the spectrum. And people might get there for different reasons. When I talk to some of my conservative friends, they might be fiscal conservative and realize that spending more money on prisons than schools is a bad long-term strategy. They might be of a more religious tradition who believe in redemption and that throwing away the key, locking someone up, throwing away the key is really not, maybe a Christian or a religious approach to thinking about humanity and how we treat people. You could be on the progressive side and you're more of a, how do we get to the root cause and understand trauma and understand, social constructs like white supremacy that build into the systems that we, look at today and that we use today, and how can we deconstruct some of those things? But across that spectrum, we might get there for different reasons, but I think there's actually really broad consensus that we can do things better, that we should look at these things critically and reevaluate and be open and honest about those conversations. And I think if we use data and research as our guide, we're going to be well served in the long run to impact public safety. So that's how I look at the movement and the framing. And now's a fantastic time in our nation's history. I mean, really, it's a little bit of a scary time, but there's no more exciting time and no more time more pregnant with opportunity than right now.
Thank you so much, Mike. I agree. Now is the time to open it up. with everything that's happening in our country, especially over the past 10 months, 11 months, now is the time to open up and really get in there and reform it. So thank you so much. I want to get to questions, but before we do that, I did want to give Janice a chance to also answer that question of sort of what's happening in terms of innovation, sort of your neck of the woods, Janice, in terms of, I'm particularly interested in your views on police reform and this is something that we need to talk about, that we are talking about, and that you have experience with, so especially from that civil rights perspective. So if you could talk about that a little bit.
Well, I'd love to. I've worked on a couple of Police Reform Act cases, most notably and most recently is the Portland Police Bureau case. And some of the things that, kind of slipped between the cracks, but other speakers here have spoken up, have addressed, it's kind of this insularity. Like Mike was saying, why would he go to be a deputy ADA when he's a really progressive, thinker, and that's not kind of what he's interested in. But when we silo off parts of the profession in that way, we end up losing perspective. We lose diversity of perspective. We lose information. And I think that's one of the things that law enforcement right now is really, really suffering from, this insularity and this kind of circular feeding itself with its own, not getting outside voices, not getting new, fresh insight to fix some of the problems. So we end up with a lot of disparity of outcomes also in law enforcement because we don't have national standards. So those are two things that I'm really interested in seeing change coming about in law enforcement. Now, the Department of Justice has two ways to impact state and local law enforcement on a grand scale. And one is that civil rights, civil enforcement tool that we have that under the Trump administration was just completely not used. I think they only brought one police pattern of practice case during that administration. There have been, I myself have worked on two. I think nationally there have been 70. And that's my experience with Vanita Gupta. We worked together on the Portland case. So the department can impact with that civil enforcement tool, but probably more impactful is the grants program through the Office of Justice Programs. They have, I don't know what their budget is, but they send out a whole lot of money to state and local law enforcement, and they can make that money contingent upon certain practices going into effect. And so that is a huge opportunity for influence. So here's some of the things, and before I get to my list, because I have a list of reforms that I think are coming up, and they're codified, or you can find them in this report that was produced in December of last year by the Brennan Center, which is named after Justice Brennan, who I had the great honor of taking a common law class in France with Justice Brennan when I was in law school. And I want you, if there's anything that you take away from what I'm saying, remember this: Justice Brennan started every opinion that he wrote, every decision that he made with the principle of human dignity. So that forms the foundation from which everything springs in his judgment, in his writings, in his rulings. And that concept of human dignity is one of the things that we need to forcefully re-inject into law enforcement. And here's some of the ways that we can do that. And I've heard that the Biden administration is interested in many of these things. And in fact, yesterday passed one of them, which was there's this, let's see if we can find it, Section 1033 program by which the Congress authorized the Department of Defense to send military equipment to state and local governments. They've sent $7 billion worth of military equipment to state and local governments. And that drives the culture of law enforcement. That militarizes public safety. So that was called to an end yesterday. I think the Biden administration withdrew that. And I apologize. I know I have an unstable internet connection here in the middle of the park, so my apologies. But here's some of the advances that I think we're going to see in law enforcement coming out of DOJ in the next year. I think there's going to be a push to strengthen the civil rights, civil enforcement investigations, the pattern of practice cases that I talked about, by authorizing subpoena power for those investigations, so that when there's evidence or when there's a complaint of a pattern or practice of civil rights abuses within state or local law enforcement or state and local prisons or jails, that subpoena power would actually empower DOJ to make a much better case, to strengthen the opportunity to get in there and make some changes, to get a court to assist with the enforcement efforts. So that's going to happen, I think. Another really big deal that needs to happen is standardizing some of these police processes, like use of force. We need to have a standard principle of use of force, so that, number one, banning all control measures that restrict airways. That's caused so many of the deaths of folks that, so restriction of airway control measures, I mean, just banning it outright, and then restricting the use of deadly force and less lethal force. If you have a national standard and state and local governments are looking for grant money out of Office of Justice programs, then they can make that grant money contingent upon your compliance with these national standards. So that's a huge carrot and stick tool that we can use. And I think that we will begin to use those. Here's another one that just makes just basic common sense, but it is not enforced I've never seen it enforced in any law enforcement agency that I've been involved with, and that is a duty to intervene. So part of law enforcement culture is that, and I've seen this, sadly, I think in the Portland case, where we've done all this really great innovations with training and recruiting and hiring and policies, and all the right stuff is there. And then when you get this really great new recruited officer sitting in a police car with a veteran, it's the culture that takes over. It's the culture that really supersedes all of the other stuff that we've been putting into place to have a fair and equitable public safety system. So if you impose a national standard of a duty to intervene on a police officer, so that if they see some partner that they're working with or another officer doing something, and you've seen the videos this summer, you see them standing around watching another officer abuse his authority, right? So if you have a duty to intervene as an imposition and a contingency for an award of these, all of this grant money that comes out of DOJ, then you begin to change law enforcement culture, and you get to reward good behavior. And that's really what we need to be seeing in state and local police office departments, is rewarding good behavior and encouraging officers to do the right thing and to report up the line so that we can actually fix some of these problems. DOJ can mandate use of force reporting, and that can go into some of the FBI reports, and we can actually have, like Mike and I think Cait were talking about, data. We can actually collect the data and know what we've got going on and how we can fix things based on what's really happening. So we need that information. We also, I think what's coming up is we're going to start a database collecting information about police misconduct so that you don't pass bad eggs from one police department to another. So we know who they are, we know what the problems have been. It not only gives us a chance to fix those problems, we make sure that people who are not suitable to wield the great authority of public safety officers, that they don't get those jobs, they don't get to have those jobs. So we're also going to be working on a national decertification process so that we can decertify police officers and take them out of the larger group the network of police officers, so that we know how to get people out. We have a process to get them out, and it's standardized. So we would have all of these very important police policies with those standards tied to some of the state and local grant money. And so, like I said, we saw the demilitarization of law enforcement begin yesterday with the Biden administration. So that really gave me some good, some encouragement that we're going to really put some of these innovations and these good government kinds of policies into place. And before I wrap up my piece here, I wanted to touch on improving prison conditions, because that's one of the things DOJ also has a tremendous influence over with these pattern of practice cases. And not to mention, you know, Bureau of Prisons is under the Department of Justice, and we have an obligation there also to make sure that you know, we don't talk out of both sides of our mouth. We don't ask state and local governments and police and prisons to do a certain thing, and we're not doing them on the federal side ourselves. So we've got to get better about doing what we know is right, even in the federal programs and the federal agencies. So I think that we're going to be seeing some serious limitation of the uses of solitary confinement, which can have some pretty serious implications for incarcerated people. I think we're going to also remove I think Congress is going to come to this fairly soon, hopefully, to remove the limitation that Pell Grants are not available for incarcerated people. So we need to start encouraging the educational component of incarceration. We need to make opportunities for strengthening and maintaining relationships of incarcerated people with their families and friends outside, so that when we ask them, when we show them the door when they're done, they're not at ground zero in terms of relationships and networks, which are so very important. I think we're also going to look at healthcare, since we've seen all year long about how COVID in jails has really not been handled very well in very many of the facilities that I've been monitoring. So I think we're going to have a kind of a come to Jesus moment about healthcare and correctional facilities. And that's the end of my list. There's a million more, but those things are listed among many other things in this Brennan Center report that came out in December. So I would encourage you all to take a look at that if you're at all interested in justice reforms for policing and correctional facilities.
Maybe
Thank
we
you.
can send the link, Mark. I can also look for it.
Sure, that would be great.
Can I just
So,
add 2 really quick things to that?
of course.
Oh, I just wanted to add I thought all of your points were excellent. One thing is data is important with stories and stories with data. It's always boring when people present a ton of data or evidence-based practices without real life stories. So bring the humanity in. As law students and lawyers, whatever you do, whether you're in criminal, civil, or any practice, data is important with stories and vice versa. Also, be careful of us presumptions from artificial intelligence. I think we're going to have a real problem across. We already plead in the federal system 98% of our cases. And so artificial intelligence can serve us in some capacity, but I'm always trying to say to people, don't lose the humanity in our system. It's all about discretion for judges, discretion for prosecutors, discretion for defenders, depending on that situation. And finally, compassionate release. I'm hoping the Department of Justice will help us open the doors to people who are literally dying. We have had more clients, we call our people clients, where we've throughout COVID have been filing motions across the country, and it's astounding how many judges across the country and Bureau of Prisons are just like, no, and then people will die in prison. And we have a very elderly population, as you all know, across the country, and there are times when people should go home or can go home because their risk factor is not there. So I want to put that out there for everyone on this call to support compassionate release, because that's what our country is supposed to emphasize, compassion.
Thank
Okay,
you so
that's
much,
what I
Cait. Thank you. Thank you. So we've got a few questions and we've got some time. So I want to ask Dean Ivanoff, please let us know what the questions are, and we'll take them up one at a time.
Great. Thank you so much, Mark. And thank you, panelists. We've had many questions come through. I want to pick one up on the topic of reforms in the prisons and kind of culture in the prison. This question comes from a student wondering if the panel could please share their thoughts on President Biden's actions towards deprivatizing prisons, and also if you can comment on how decriminalizing children's behaviors can stop the school to prison pipeline.
Thank you. So I'm happy to address the privatization, the prison privatization issue from the federal perspective. It looks different in the feds than it does at the state level. And so I'll defer to my colleagues who know more about what's happening in the states, and certainly the state of Oregon. But in the federal system, the private prisons are, when we're talking about the Bureau of Prisons, the use of private prisons is mostly used for short-term jail stays, right? And not for long-term federal correctional institutions. So in the scheme of things, again, sort of thinking only about how the Bureau of Prisons under the Justice Department uses private facilities, it's generally in a relatively short-term capacity, in a jailing capacity, before a person may go to a federal facility, a long-term federal facility. And there are multiple problems with private facilities. And so it makes sense what the Biden administration is doing. I think in the federal system, it's a much larger problem with immigration detention, right? That's really where the issue of private facilities in the federal system is a major problem. How they are being used, and this has been done for years, how they're being used for immigration detention, which is non-criminal. So I just wanted to address that from the federal perspective. What was the second part of that question, Becky? Was
yes, if anyone on the panel wants to talk about the importance of decriminalizing children's behavior so we can stop the school to prison pipeline.
Sure. Let me ask Mike to address that part of the question. Certainly, Mike, to the degree you can address the private prison piece too, from a state and county perspective, that could be helpful.
Yeah, easy answer on the state private prisons. It's by law not permitted in Oregon for the Department of Corrections to use private prisons. So we don't have those in the state of Oregon. So not an issue for us. I will say part of the question I heard in part of our conversation was about humanity in prison. And I think, my experience in Norway, and even in some ways in Angola, but in different ways, is you get good results when you treat people like human beings. And there's a bill that I think is going to be looked at this session in Oregon about whether or not people who are incarcerated should have the right to vote. To me, that's a simple humanization thing. I mean, you commit a crime, that doesn't mean you're not a citizen of this country. If you were already a citizen of the country, why do we strip you of your right to vote? What better time to start engaging in civics and learning about what's going on in your community, and asking questions of local politicians by mail or however you can. I mean, why would we what public safety purpose does it serve to take that away from people? And it's just a basic human dignity. So, I think humanity in prisons is a great thing, and we should look at more and more opportunities. In terms of decriminalization of childhood behavior, in Oregon, so I talked about, we had ballot measure 11. We have ballot measure 11 on the books, which is our mandatory minimum sentencing laws for violent crimes. The legislature passed in 2019 a Senate bill called 1008. The major champion of that bill was Senator Jackie Winters. And Jackie, Senator Winters is a dear friend of mine, went to Norway, went to Angola. She was a huge believer in redemption and that ability. And she really dragged that bill across the line and said, you know what, mandatory sentencing should not absolutely apply automatically to juveniles, so that we're not automatically waiving them into adult court and trying them as adults just because they're accused of certain crimes. So we took a big step forward in Oregon of changing that law. And at least now it has to go to a hearing in front of a judge if the prosecution is going to seek a waiver into adult court. So, I mean, this is an area where we're looking, we need to, I think the argument not only was, youth and redemption, but brain science and understanding adolescent development. And so I think the legislature really did. They said, what is the research? What is the science? How do we start to apply that to our law? And they made that's a seismic change in the state of Oregon to not automatically waive juveniles into adult court for those crimes. So I think we're heading somewhat in that direction.
Thank you so much, Mike. And speaking of adolescent brain development, I just want to put in a plug for my agency's podcast. It's called Off Paper. And that off paper means when you are finished either with pretrial release and you've been sentenced, or you finished a term of probation and you've been released from court supervision, you're off paper. But we have an episode that talks specifically about adolescent brain development and the criminal justice system. And the expert is Robert Kincher from Harvard Medical School. So I would recommend that. The name of the podcast is Off Paper. I want to, Judge Aiken wants to weigh in, which is awesome. So Judge Aiken, please.
Well, I would be remiss if I didn't weigh in. My three-legged stool, probably the work I'm most proud of is being a board member and a participant in the Relief Nursery early intervention programs for children of abuse and neglect, because we shouldn't wait until they're adolescents and we're trying to waive them in or out of adult court. If you read pre-sentence reports, and I would put in a plug that the pre-sentence writers in the federal system, a lot of them are lawyers. I can tell you I look constantly for a pre-sentence report that does not involve child abuse, neglect, maltreatment, drug or alcohol, chaos in their homes. And they are so rare that basically I would tell you 99% of the cases I see, both in state and federal and pre-sentence report, have child abuse and neglect and trauma. And so Mark's plug on neuroscience is the Harvard Center, which is a center for law, and for the medical school on law, brain, and behavior is an institute that is remarkable, and that's been leading a lot of the work nationally. But if you want to make a difference, we go back to child abuse and neglect and maltreatment, and to interventions and innovations with therapeutic preschools and therapeutic programs to break that cycle. Because the work we do at the other end, I work at the front end with children who are from 0 to 6 before we move them into schools, and I work at the back end with the highest risk offenders, same models, is if we can prove that you can address those issues, we will normalize the process to get services and to have a better criminal justice system with outcomes. So I couldn't agree more. If we intervened earlier in child abuse and neglect and addressed those issues and made children our true resource, our treasured resource, and did better work, we would be way ahead. And I have to shout out to my hero. Jackie Winters was one of my heroes. She would not leave the session unless the relief nurseries were fully funded, and we replicated those across the state of Oregon and have 36 major programs and growing that infrastructure. And she at the same time was a huge proponent of the reform work at the other end, and just died days after making sure that these reforms occurred. She was a rock star, and people who go into public service like she went in with a heart and a passion are few and far between, and we need to celebrate the work that she did, and we need to make sure that somebody steps in those shoes. They were fabulous, good looking high heels, and always matched her outfit. But somebody needs to take that role up and be the champion, because she would not let that session end without those reforms. And that's the kind of work that we're talking about creating. And that's the kind of work each one of these panelists are doing in their own venues.
Thank you so much, Judge Aiken. I want to, we've got some time. So back to Dean Ivanoff. Next question.
Thank you, Mark. The next question comes from a lawyer in our community. Clearly, the last 4 years have challenged what most of us have taken for granted for too long, that we are a country of laws and not of individuals. How can legal professionals engage in the political process in a more robust way to ensure that the rule of law is protected from powerful interests and people who seek to undermine it?
Thank you so much. It's a wonderful question and so true. I was recently in a correspondence with a law professor at a major law school, and this semester he's teaching federal courts. And this was, of course, we were engaging in this email correspondence while all of this craziness was going on. Sometime around the 6th, I think it might have been just after the 6th, so a couple of weeks ago. And he was kind of wondering how he's going to start off his federal courts course in light of everything that's been going on. I'm very proud to say that I suggested to him that perhaps you should have the students read Federalist 78, which is about the independence of the federal judiciary. And then have them read some of the opinions that have come out in the most recent election litigation, both state court and federal court opinions from judges from across the political spectrum. That is a great way to start a course on federal courts. One of the things I've discovered is most law students can graduate without ever having read Federalist 78, which is amazing to me, because it really does lay the groundwork for why we have Article 3 in the Constitution. And so all of this is to say, my answer would be civic education, right? And there's a really important place for lawyers and courts and law schools in civic education, beyond the walls of the law school, out in the community, working with people in very creative ways to engage in civic education, which is a lot of what we've been describing over the course of our comments during the panel. So that would be my response. I'm very curious to hear what my fellow panelists would say, how they would react to that question. Janice, you want to take a stab at it?
Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Yeah, I've got some snow blowing action going on over here, so I'm not sure if I'm okay. One of the things that I was amazed at was why weren't bar associations more active in policing these lawyers who are bringing obviously unsupportable arguments to courts in order to cause delay and to cause extra judicial consequences like political platforming and such. And so I always thought that one of the things that lawyers can do to enforce, to reinforce that we are a country of laws and that these rules apply to everybody is to make sure that we police ourselves and don't encourage clients to bring actions or allow them to, or be the mouthpiece for actions that are not supported and things that we know better not to do. And then also I was surprised that the judges didn't do more to say, this isn't right. You can't bring this here, because I've seen many judges in my practice, federal and state court judges, court of appeal judges, threaten lawyers within an inch of their life. Bring your toothbrush if you're going to continue to bring this argument. It's unsupported and you don't have facts to support it, and
Right.
you're wasting the court's time and all of these things, and just threaten sanctions. And that goes a far way to making somebody kind of get back on the right path and not grandstand or make a circus of a court. But I did not see enough of that. I hardly saw any of it at all. And I was surprised about that.
Yeah, thank you. Similar observation. Cait, I wonder what your reactions are. You're somebody who's been involved as an educator for many, many years, as you described. And as a lawyer, a public lawyer, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think it's an excellent question, and I think there are many dimensions to this, like a kaleidoscope. But I think one of the biggest fault is that we have lost our civic education. Even as I used to teach street law even to kindergartners, and I don't know if you all know street law programs, but I think University of Oregon has one, doesn't it? I mean, we taught it in New Orleans in the schools and in the prisons, and they have wonderful interactive materials, but people learn about the value of an independent judiciary and how our system of checks and balances works in their own lives. So I would say every lawyer, every law student should teach a street law class, and it can be from the community elderly center, if you will, to, you know, a bunch of your family members, and get together to sort of break the echo chambers. The first was that I would say, get out there and do some civic education. And if you don't know where to go look for street law programs. Two, I think that we have to really rethink as a group of lawyers and soon to be lawyers, how we quell hate speech. I am a First Amendment believer, but I watched when I was at Harvard, this librarian who was really a terrific young man. He had been brutally attacked for being a gay man when he was traveling in the part of the country, a certain part of the country. And he just started going on sites and looking at hate speech sites and seeing, and how exponentially he used to just report to people, like, it's growing, it's growing. This is 20 years ago, like 15 years ago, maybe not 20. So, you know, we shouldn't be surprised, as everybody said, that they stormed the Capitol and that they got in there and said, you know, they were surprised, by the way, for some of those of you that didn't know, in the Capitol, they were like, they didn't think it would be that ornate. They didn't know. Some people knew right where to go, but I don't think we really talk about the bicameral houses and how it works and how this, that's a sad, sad day. So hate speech and social media, I'm a believer right now that we have to tap that in, and genocides have been a result of some of those things. And then I really want to add that all politics is local. I think Tip O'Neill was right. And if we don't stop the, and I do it too. I mean, I have to say, I was watching what was happening in the Capitol. And I used to get scorned because if I would wear in the hot summer days, the sleeveless outfits in the Capitol, you would get escorted out. You had to go put a jacket on. So knowing that to watching what happened, and I was born and raised in DC, I was screaming at the TV like a crazy woman, I'm embarrassed to say. But then I'd turn around and I'd say to my husband and my 18-year-old son, but oh my God, tomorrow we're gonna have to represent some of these people in our defender office, which we did. And as one defender wrote, you know, if they knew that I was a card-carrying ACLU member who watches PBS NewsHour and, you know, does volunteer work and blah, 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 and that I'm a gay man and I'm going to be representing them, I thought, you know, more power to you. Go in and talk to these people and represent them, because that is our system. So I had real problem. I mean, I know we're going to spend a lot of money representing those charged with the federal crimes. They are our state, and the Public Defender Service will go out, help them. But those lawyers are going to give it their all, even though they disagree with their viewpoints. But that's what we have to talk to people about. That's what makes our country great. Okay, I used that word. I can't believe I just did that. I meant that's what how our system works. It's really important that we balance those scales again. And I think we're right on track. So all politics is local.
Thank you so much, Cait. You know, I'm looking at the time. I know we're a little bit over.
Wait, Mark,
so sure, Judge Aiken, I will defer to you. You're being the judge.
You have to ask Mike that question.
Oh, I would love for Mike to weigh in.
Even if we're running a little late, because even on the news shows this weekend, I heard January 6th compared with what's happening in Portland.
Oh yeah, we should talk about that.
And I think, and you inherited that job at the exact, when the fire was the hottest, and you've been remarkable in managing the end of someone else's term and then beginning, which should have been your time to think and plan. And you've done it, I think, without a lot of fanfare, but you've done it beautifully in so many ways. And now you have your term to begin. But I think you have to weigh in on this and tell us what you think you've learned already in your time in Portland.
Thank you. Mike?
Yeah. You know, I agree. politics is local until the president says your name in a speech during his campaign. Then things get a lot more national quickly. So yeah, it's been a learning process, no doubt. You know, stepping in at day, I think 60 or 70 of consistent nights of protests, and taking over at that time. I approached it very locally, and I had a transition team, and I talked with community members, and I thoughtfully said, this is where we're going to prioritize our resources. And then that got scooped up and suddenly was part of the national narrative, as Portland has been on the front pages a lot. So I'm learning to navigate city, county, state, and then national politics, and they all are different currents. They different people, different concerns. But going back to my campaign a little even before that, my campaign was very grassroots and very local. And that's, the funding for my campaign was almost all here in Oregon. So it was a very local race, but then swept up into national politics very quickly. So I'll say that, January 6th, I, of course, reject any comparisons or analogies to people in Oregon and Portland, taking to the streets to say that the criminal legal system has failed them for too long, to people trying to, stop the peaceful transition of a power in our democracy. I reject that comparison. Obviously, some people make that. But it is challenging, and we've gone through very many iterations of different protests, and some people's strategies that I don't agree with. Breaking windows, lighting things on fire. That's not a speech issue. You have crossed the line, and that to me is where we need to enforce the rule of law and accountability and everything else. But it's a challenging, fluid situation, and so. Yeah, I think what I've learned is establishing good relationships, working with law enforcement, but also community, and getting folks on the same page, and trying to keep it as local as we can. I think that is where we have our strength. And so it's been quite an education for the last 6 months, but I'm looking forward to getting started on my term now.
Well, thank you so much, Mike. And thank you to everybody else on the panel for this discussion. And thank you so much to Judge Aiken for asking us to participate. It's really been stimulating and pretty awesome. So thank you. And let me turn the hosting duties back over to Becky.
I want to, before we go, I have to thank, these are fabulous. In your life, I want you to remember, in your life, people are the jewels in your crown. Relationships, and these are rock stars, jewels in a crown of a career that spans a lot of time. So collect people, and many of mine I started collecting right in law school, realizing that I wanted to do this work with people who shared my values and saw the world through this lens. But we wouldn't be able to do this, and I just have to pay a big tribute to Becky Ivanoff, who's the dean and willing to pick this up and work with us to bring in different voices and different people. And it's been a huge honor, a huge privilege to do this over the last 5 years. And I look forward to our next program, which we hope will have something in the spring and maybe in person, but we'll see. But I just have to say that I'm sitting here texting my speakers because they are truly, what a joy. And I thank all of you for your listening carefully to them, and really excited that we will continue this. And my hat's off to Becky for this work, and Lorelei and the whole team that made this happen today. So Becky, I'm sorry to butt right in, but I really felt the need to have to single you out and thank you for making this such a seamless, great program.
Well, Judge Aiken, thank you for your kind words, and panelists, thank you for this robust discussion today. I can tell you we had lots of questions coming from the audience, lots of curiosity. I think we could do, as we said before, at least a day on this topic. And I just want to thank each and every one of you for sharing your time with us. And
Becky, it's Mark. If folks want to reach out via LinkedIn, please, they should feel free, and happy to continue the conversation with them individually.
excellent. Thank you so much for that, Mark. And to our students and our admitted students and our undergrad students, I hope this program, I trust that it has given you a taste of what you all will be able to do as change makers with your law degree and as you pursue legal education. I want to echo Cait's encouragement around the importance of teaching civics, and that every one of you can get involved in teaching a street law program now. I think that it's critically important at this time for us to provide that kind of an education to our fellow community members. So thank you all for joining us today. As I said at the beginning, we'll have a recording available to students through MyLaw, and we'll make the recording available to other community members who weren't able to participate. I'll have more information with that within the coming days. So with that, please join me in thanking our panelists, and I wish you all a very happy afternoon.
Hey.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.